third talk is to be given by Aishwarya and Kala on DB migration tips and best practices. Aishwarya is an Oracle aficionado working with Pythian and has spent a significant part of last decade working with exploring, migrating, perform with Oracle databases and technology. She is a regular speaker across various Oracle user groups, Oracle groundbreakers, and OG Yatras and long, SEO, AIOG, and a regular contributor to the Oracle community via her blogs and posts. She is an Oracle case associate, always keen to learn, discuss, and explore new technologies. Today, she is going to talk about DB migration tips and best practices that can be used by anyone. And I hope we will definitely get a few good pointers from her on all these topics. So I would like to once again thank everyone for joining into this particular session. And I would hand over my microphone to Aishwarya. Aishwarya, please take the baton and carry forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tejas. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the warm introduction. I'll just share my screen. So good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you for your time for being here. I think I'll stop my video to just conserve the bandwidth. Okay, yeah, that should be good. So again, a warm welcome, everybody. Today, we are here to talk about database migration and upgrade, and a lot of things that often go under the radar when we are working on such projects. Now, okay, about me, I think Tejas has already covered. I'm from Dehradun. I've lived most of my life in Vadodara, as you know it. So yeah, I think everything else Tejas has covered. So about Pythian, I work with Pythian. So this is something that is about my organization. And let's now jump to our agenda, excuse me, our focus for today. So, when we are dealing with database migration projects, we usually tend to focus on, and which is rightly so, a major focus, a major driver is how are we going to actually move the data from its source to its target, as we often call it. We might be moving from one platform to another. We could be upgrading our database version, or we could be moving our database technology stack from, let's say, SQL Server to Oracle. It could be anything. So but there are a lot of components around a database that are integrated with it that affect it, and those are the things that we often tend to miss. And for a migration project, for a successful migration project, I think that is something that is extremely valuable, and that's what we're trying to figure out. How do we go through it? So that is what our agenda is. So again, let's begin in a very generic term, where to go. So whatever the platform is, the first thing that you want to do, or you want to figure out, where do you want to go, what do you want to be on, or what do you want to upgrade on. Now I'm talking this specifically in terms of Oracle, right? So but this is true for any platform, any RDBMS as such. Your primary restraint is your application compatibility. So at the end of the day, application is the business driver. So what we want to know is what your application is compatible with. You can have the latest database versions on the market, but if your application is not compatible with it, you really can't be doing anything about it. So that's what you need to figure out the first. Now, application compatibility is just the starting point. That's the idea that I want to talk about right now. So why do I say this? Because on your application compatibility depends your database compatibility, as well as your OS and kernel. Now, database compatibility is something that's pretty simple. You just look up a database matrix, you see what's compatible where, and blah, blah, blah. But OS and kernel would be something that you would want to standardize across your environment. Let's say you're working on Windows, right? That's your OS. So you want to know what's your OS that you want to have across the environment. You want your organization to be on a standardized platform, a standardized patch set, which makes things really comfortable in terms of automation, in terms of security, especially. Yeah. So these are the things that you need to be there. So let's take a look on how do we do it in terms of Oracle. So in terms of Oracle, let's suppose you say that 19C is the version of your interest and Oracle Enterprise Linux is where you want to be, the platform. So you've got this Oracle certification matrix in place, right? Another question to ask would be, do you want to be on a PDB or not, right? Something like that. But this is this Oracle certification matrix that you have, that is an Oracle support tool where you plug in your variables. You can consider these as your variables. You plug in your variables 19C and OEL, and what you get is this information, this set of information that these are your certified. If you want to go on 19C for Linux x86-64, these are the versions of OS that you can be on. Now, if you open up this, so our interest was OEL. So, these are the interesting links I have. If you open this up, what you see is you see this entire node where it then tries to delve deeper what exactly would be the minor version of the database. So database has this major version and minor version. So then you get talking about minor version. For example, in this particular combination or the example that we're talking about, it tells us that you can only be on 19.7. That's the minimum RU you can be on. And there's a minimal kernel version that you can be on, right? And again, the interesting thing is, note, it's just not Oracle Linux 8 or 8.1. It's talking about, in fact, even your RH Red Hat compatible kernel stream or your unbreakable enterprise kernel, which is the one that you are subscribed to. So this is pretty important. So if you look at it, you'll see that you're getting kind of caps in place. So your database version at a lower bound has to be at least 19.7, and your OS has to be at least 8.1 if you're in this particular stream, or 8.0 if you're on Red Hat compatible, right? Again, this is very minor note, and these are the things that we often miss. There's a minor note over there that talks about ACFS. Now, this can be misleading because this is not about only ACFS. If you go delve deeper into the storage concepts, this is also about ASMFD, that's your ASM filter driver. So it talks about all the compatibility versions over here. So this particular example, it is adding a upper cap to your limits where you can migrate to. So as you see, we had a lower cap and now we have an upper cap. That cap, that's 19.12, and an upper cap on the your kernels as well, your OS as well. So again, if you look at the UEK, you were looking at the RHC, the Red Hat version of it. Now, if you look at the unbreakable enterprise version of it, you get a different upper cap. So depending on which version you want to choose, this is how you can kind of filter out where you want to go. Now you've got two options. You can okay, this is a simple command. This tells you how to check if your ASM filter driver is supported or not. So this is just for just for information purpose. Now, as you're talking about, these are the two options that we had finally filtered it down to. You can be on any version between 19.7 to 19.12 if you are on a Red Hat compatible Linux. But if you want to go on UEK, Unbreakable Enterprise Kernel, then you'll have, the options are limited to 19.10. That's the certified versions. Now, how do you decide this? You probably want your system admin's input. Again, we were talking about standardization earlier. So you want to take their input. Let's say we took our input from our sysadmin and they say that we want to go with RHC. That's what our enterprise is subscribed to. So in that case, you've now fixed your OS, right? You want to be on OEL, RHC 8.0, blah, 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 the entire kernel thing. Now, what you want to do is you only have one variable left. That's your database version. And that can be anywhere between 19.7 to 19.12. Now, how do you choose that? How do you funnel this information? You've got this information. So you've got like 4 or 5 minor versions to choose from. So that's your RU question, which RU to be on. Now, here your first thought probably would be latest and greatest. Let's be on the latest version. It is probably the most secure, and which is absolutely correct. And how do we choose? I mean, usually our instinct is to go with the latest version, which is, I'd say, in most cases, the best choice, but not always. Why? Because be aware of bugs. There are a lot of bugs in the latest versions, which are usually not catered to immediately. It takes around a couple of months for things to, for the Oracle support in this case, to develop patches for it. So how do you understand if this is the case, or if there is a really worrisome bug that you should be bothered about? Okay. So look at these dogs. These are example documents that are there for our particular version, 19C in case. You'll find it in Metalink. And there are advisories associated with each version. For example, if it's 19.10, these are the documents, right? Look out for bugs. Now, these bug reports can be really overwhelming, right? You don't have to go and worry about each and every one of them. But what you want to look at is anything that might crash your system. Many a times there are bugs that are known to crash systems quite frequently. If you find there's something that might affect your offer that is applicable to your configuration and might affect you at 19.12, then it's better to avoid it for a few months, right? You'll get a more stable environment in 19.11 perhaps. So those are the things that depend on your configuration. By configuration I mean, suppose there's a bug that's only affecting Oracle RAC, and not affecting an Oracle standalone, then great. If you're running on a standalone, you really don't need to bother about that bug, right? So depending on your configuration, you need to choose and then uh, finalize. But the point is you have to be aware about these bugs when making a decision. Now, another thing other than bugs is the one-off patches. What of these, there are recommended one-off patches that come with each and every version. Now, these patches impact your performance, your optimizer, they enhance these things. So these are something that are pretty valuable to look at. Now, you got something similar for Oracle Exadata as well. Exadata is the flagship product, which is basically an engineered system for Oracle. So if you're running on an engineered system, then this would be the note to follow. And here's the thing, you don't only need to look at the target, you want to upgrade to 19C or migrate to 19C. So you're looking at, basically our concentration would be on the 19C environment, but that's not the only thing we need to worry about. You should also take a look at your source, because the migration tools that you're using, many a times those tools also have a lot of known bugs or known issues associated. So when you're preparing for it, always scan through the patches, this particular note, which will tell you, if you're going to this particular version, be aware of these problems that might hit, because you don't want your migration process to fail itself, right? So this is important to, just to make sure that the process itself goes smoothly and you do land on your target. Again, another thing, related thing, is just for, information might come in handy at some point in time. Related to your ASM, if you're running on ASM, these are the things that you can check. Some commands that can come in handy that will help you check the cluster mode, especially if you're running on a Flex ASM. So another important point, I mean, this is one of the last things in this particular section. This is about bug fixes. So we were talking about, first thing we talked about was determining the version, finalizing the OS, right? Then we filtered out the bugs and the patches and we applied. So let's say we finalize and we come to 19.10. The important thing to note is bug fixes that are shipped with these PSUs are always disabled by default. Why is it so? Because these fixes also can impact your performance and optimizer. Now, when you're doing a security patching, right, traditionally the enterprises do not check for performance and optimization when you're doing a security patching. That's not the goal of a security patching, performance enhancements, right? So the bug fixes that are associated with performance and optimizing are disabled by default. But since this is a migration project, this is the perfect time to test for performance and optimization, right? So do not forget to enable these particular bug fixes. So as I said, these bug fixes have the potential to change optimizer behavior. That's why they are disabled by default. But since we're migrating and upgrading, so this is the perfect time to actually enable these bug fixes and test out your application. So new builds are the prime, and the way to do this is this particular command. You use the dbms optim bundle and you enable all the bug fixes that are there. Now, this is kind of a checklist about all that we discussed up to now. You check your application compatibility, your OS version, you check what is the platform, the storage platform you want to be on. That's your ASM, ASCFS, and the compatibility related to it, the bugs, the ASM, and enabling the fixes that come with it, just to ensure that, you. Now, once we're there, what we need to do. So now what we've done is we've determined the exact version we need to go to. Now what we need to do is we need to prepare our source database and get all the information so that we are able to migrate. So in order to prepare, what you're doing is you get a new system. You're prepping for a migration. The first thing you're doing, one of the first things you'll be doing is you'll get a new system to migrate to. That will be your target, right? Okay. Okay. Sorry. So, right. So I think that's accidental. Okay, no problem. So one of the things is when you're on the new system, you want to be on the, yeah, that's fine. You want to be on the latest security in terms of OS, right? So your OS would be on the latest security. Can we mute this? Okay, thank you so much. Let me just... Okay, so where was I? We were talking about the security patches, right? So security patches are something that we often, thank you. So security patches are something that you would want on your target system, right? So that you are on the latest security list of security updates are present on your system, so that you can avoid later patching schedules for later. Now the other thing is that on your source, so other than the Oracle software or the RDBMS software, there could be other software present on your source, something like MFA, right? You could have an MFA agent or a monitoring agent or a cloud agent that could be present on source. Now, these are the RPMs that you would want pre-installed on your target as well. So this is something that is additional to your RDBMS, but these are the things that you would need on your target post your migration, as well as various utilities, tools and utilities like TCP dump, telnet, STS, blah, blah, blah. So that's why you would want these there. So you need to list out this system, these things from your source, and ensure that they're there on your target. So RPMs, tools and standards are pretty important to have, to list and to install beforehand on your target cell. Another interesting thing is time zone. So time zone is something like time date CTL is a command that will give you a time zone. And you can see over here what is a DST, when it starts, and all this information. So why is it important, or why do we care as a database person? Why would I care about a server time zone? So it's pretty, kind of interesting. The interesting thing is that sysdate and systime. So if you work with a database, you understand that there's a command called select sysdate from dual, right? So that command does not use the database time zone. That is purely dependent on a system call get time of the day. And the behavior or output of this command, the select sysdate from dual, can differ depending on the type of connection. What do I mean? What I mean is, if it is a local connection, local to the server, bigwith connection as we call it, it would be different. And if it is a connection over a database listener, the behavior would be different. That is, over here, let's take an example, right? I log on to my server and I use a simple select sysdate from dual. I get -4. So that's the time zone I'm in. Okay. However, if I export my TZ, now this is my system variable. I expose my time zone variable, system variable to UTC, and I again do a select sysdate, systimestamp or sysdate, and I get a UTC time, right? So this tells me, what does this tell me? This tells me that my time zone is dependent when my session begins, right? So this, what I see, is depending on the value of TZ variable when my session started. If my session started, my TZB variable was set to EST, I see the EST time. If my TZ variable was set to UTC, I see the UTC time. So it tells me it does not depend on your database time zone. It depends on the TZ variable on your system, right? This is what happens in a bigwith connection. However, for application connections or listener connection, this will depend on the TZ variable again, but when your database was started or your instance was started, as we call it, right? Now, if you're working on a rack or GI, this is controlled in your file called CRS config file, right? That's there in this particular location. And this is how you see this information. Now, here you can see this is the time zone that I wanted to be in. An interesting case over here, of course, if you make any changes to it, you need to restart the entire cluster stack. Now, the thing is, suppose I've got 4 nodes on my system and I can see my date times as, -7, -7, -7. And on one of the node, target 4, that is, I see it's -6, right? So there's just difference. Now I'm running on the same database, I'm connected to the same database, but I see on one of the instances, the time differs. Now, what happened is that if I mean, as I mentioned, it is at the time, I mean, sorry for the bit distorted image, but if I look at this time on target 4, if I look at this, I mean, you can troubleshoot this by using strings and you can see that it was Denver and not mountain, right? So this is how you can troubleshoot. This is just a troubleshooting step to figure out what went wrong. And in order to do this, these are a bunch of commands that you can use with Oracle to fix your time zone. So that's why time zone is pretty important when you're dealing with databases, especially when you're installing, starting and stopping. Your environment variables should be properly set. So it, as you see, it was Denver over here. What we wanted was Phoenix. Okay. Another important thing around this would be the temp files D. So this is a Unix concept. So Linux 7.7 introduced this particular daemon, and this daemon defaults to removing files. That's the work of this daemon. A cleanup is one of the responsibilities of this daemon, right? Cleaning up files. Now, why are we bothered about it? Right? This is the default configuration that comes with it. It can delete files that are not accessed, temp files that are usually there, right? So again, why do we care as RDBMS people running RDBMS on a server? It is because Oracle stores something called socket files in where TMP, which are nothing but, which are basically files that are used for inter-process communication or IPC. So these files are very important and are used for to establish session, to pass along variables, information, right? So the consequences of deleting these files could be pretty deadly. And you can find a lot of blogs over here on our website which talk about this particular use cases and a note describing it. So what we want to do is we want to ensure that default processes on the system do not overwrite any database files. That is the main concept or the main thing that we're trying to ensure. We want to ensure in this case that the temp daemon does not remove any temp related files from the Oracle related files from the temp folders. And we, as a product, Oracle product, we do have a well-defined set of paths where your files would be written. And therefore we just use these configuration, update it, and make sure that everything is there. And this is how you do it. You update this particular file, you restart this process, you make sure that everything is in place, right? These are just the steps to do it. But your idea is that you don't want daemons or root processes or server processes to remove files that belong to RDBMS. You want to avoid those cleanups. Now, another interesting stuff would be time server. Now, time server is something that ensures that time is synchronized across your organization on all your devices, on your servers. It could be your laptops. So how do they ensure that it's, it's right now it's 12:30 p.m. IST. How do they do that? They will have an internal time server for your organization, or there are global time servers as well that you can use if you don't want to use something for specific to your organization. And it will connect to those time servers and verify the time, right? Now, the daemon in the Linux world, everything is in terms of daemons, right? So daemon associated for Linux, the Linux 7 was it was previously NTPD. That was the old daemon, and now they've come up with an enhanced version of it called cronny. So that's the new option to maintain time, NTP time synchronization, as they call it. Now, what we've noticed is when migrating and upgrading recently is that there are a lot of problems in the CRS logs. If you notice stuff like this, these errors, then there's probably a problem that's related to your cronny. What happens is that, as I mentioned, NTPD, the old daemon, it wants to control your time synchronization, right? So NTPD wants to control your NTP or your time synchronization, whereas Linux 7 says that cronny is the new way to control your NTP, and therefore there's the conflict which leads to a lot of error. So now the very obvious question would be, if cronny is the new way, then why do we have NTPD running on my servers? Of course, if cronny is there, NTPD should not be running. You just need one of these running, obviously, right? So what happens is a lot of automation that was running, it could be Ansible or any kind of automation that was used to build out the server. They usually have the default, they have these steps to configure NTPD daemons by default. And out of the box, Linux has this additional daemon cronny configured by default. Now, because our automations, in case our automations are not updated to cater for this particular change, then we will run into a conflict, and this conflict is going to impact our database installs and database setups as well. So this is something we need to be careful about. And how do we fix it? You can fix your timetable, choose what you want to do, and stick with it, right? So in our case, let's see, you want to be with cronny. So you disable the NTPD. This is the way you do it. You configure your time server. This is the way you configure it. Okay. Now, this is the file, and you can find more details over here about how is this set up. The important thing over here is, if you look over here, time 1 and time 2, these are internal time servers that I was talking about. So if you, and these are times, this is the source. So if you don't, so here, as you see, we've defined our sources over here. So if you don't want to define these sources, what will happen? Or, I mean, the other option is you can have free pool dot ntp dot something. I mean, that's the, I don't remember the entire website, but there's a pool of free NTP servers that is available on the internet that you can use to synchronize time. So, but you have to be careful. I mean, anybody could be there, and it can get a bit, excuse me, it can be a bit tricky to handle it. So again, if you're working on a specific Oracle rack configuration, you have to be careful about NTP too, but that's very specific to Oracle rack. Now, coming to storage. So we're talking about server as of now. Let's look a quick look at the storage as well. Now, when you're working with storage, try and stick with the same size disks, physical disks, right? Now, especially if you're consolidating a database. If you're consolidating a database on a server, let's say you've got 10 databases running and you want to add a 13th, or I mean 3 more databases, you would need additional space for these 3 more. So first thing you'd want to do is you want to identify what are the running disks, and this is the way you can do it. So once you've identified the running disks, right, you read, I mean, this is one of the ways that you can do it. You can read your header using this particular command just to ensure that this disk is not unallocated and it is in use, right? So once you do that, the next thing that you do is you want to ensure that your partitions, the physical partitions of your disks, are aligned. So you've done that, you've aligned your disks, and then you check. This is the command you want to use to check if your disk alignment is optimal. Now, once you've done that, you then label your disks. This is the command to label your disk, asmfd this. And just a note over here that if you've not yet initialized your system, this would be your init, would be the way to do it. This is because your filter driver has not yet been installed. So in a new installation, this would be the command. That's something different. So we're talking about storage. Let's say we've configured our disks. The next thing we would want to review would be our memory configuration. Now, with the latest installs, you've got a lot of RPMs that come by default that set up your entire software and packages, as well as your memory configuration. Now, these memory configuration are a set of defaults that are coming. Always remember this. This is not customized to your system. Let's say this by default, this memory configuration sets your available memory to 128 GB, but your system just has 64 GB of RAM, right? In that case, you would have to tweak that to, match your particular server. And if you're on a Linux system, do not forget huge pages. I mean, that is very important. It especially with Unix system, you do not want a lot of swapping going on in the server. And you've got this particular document to refer to. These are the steps you can refer to, and the parameters that you would want to modify. All the details are here. The last thing in this server prep section I would want to emphasize one is always reboot, because once you've made these changes, you want to know that your changes are persistent, and the only way to test it is to reboot the server. Many times you make changes. For example, you're changing an MTU on your network NIC card, right? You want to ensure that all the proper configuration files have been changed to ensure that the MTU change persists across the reboot. So that's an important thing to check. So reboot it, check it. Now, since you're talking about reboot, there's another thing that you would do, that is integrate startup and shutdown of the RDBMS with your server. So there are quite a few ways to do it. And one of the ways, which is, I mean, with the latest Linux servers versions, it becomes quite easy to do it, is using the services. Now, systemd are services, and dbshut and dbstart scripts are something that come by default with the Oracle database installation. So all you need to do is, now these are some of the benefits of using this particular method. That is that it will depend on Aura tab. It handles both the database as well as listener restarts, and you can modify and add configuration for default, non-default listeners as well. Now, how do you do it? You create a service. This is the way you create a service. You reload the service, you enable it, right? And then you can reboot to test that your database also starts up as well as soon as the server reboots. So what it does is this is essentially brings down your outage time a lot. So for example, there's something wrong and your servers suddenly rebooted. In that case, your database will be up as soon as it can, right? As soon as the server reboots, automatically your database will restart. And of course, the listener as well. So if it is something that you desire or something you want to do, this is something you can configure at this point in time as well when you're setting up a new system to migrate to. So these are the things that we discussed about in this particular section. Now, another important thing is identifying the clients. Now, why do you want to identify client? I mean, we are migrating a database. Why do we care about clients? So here's the thing. Suppose your client was able to successfully connect to a source, right? After you migrate to a target, it's not able to connect to a target. One of the reasons could be firewall, okay? So you want to identify the location of the client so you can make appropriate changes to the firewall rules, right? So you want to know where to make the changes. Again, the other thing you would want to do is you want to identify the client so you can update the TNS name. So, TNS is something that the configuration that client uses to connect to the source. So once you update this, these will be the rules that we need to connect. We'd need to connect to the target. So what do I mean by configuration? The information of where it lies, you need the client host. That's one thing you need. And the other thing is you need the SSL certificates. Why do we need the SSL certificates? Let's say we have opened the firewall rules and we are able to, we were able to connect using SSL certificates between client and source. If now you can run into this particular error. Why? Because the signature of your target has changed. Since it has changed, you would want a new signature uploaded to the client as well. So what you'll do, you'll create a new certificate, you'd put it there on the client wallet as well. That is to ensure that the communication between client and target persists after you migrate it, right? Now, client, when I talk client, it could be an application server, it could be any WebLogic server, any server that's hosting your application. You basically wanted to connect to your target after migration is done. And in order to do so, what you want to know in addition to the client location is the protocol that the client use. Protocol, that is it using a secure protocol or not? Okay. And SSL handshake is something that it does when it has the client. So even if it has the versions, even if it has the certificates, the connectivity can still fail. Why? It can fail because let's say in the older version, the list of cipher suits that were being used were different. And now this is different. So you want to know what version your client is so that you can determine the appropriate cipher suits. So these are the things that you want to identify. How do you identify it? You identify, the easiest way to do is audit. You audit your database connections. You get a lot of information, but this information could be, could still be missing some bits and pieces of information, and you don't particularly get the client version or the protocol. So what you could do is you could query this particular view, that is v$session_connect_info, and here you get a ton of information. It's like a treasure trove. You get your machine information, you get your client version, you in fact even get your protocol from the same view. You see it's TCPS, which means it uses certificates or SSL connectivity. So yeah, that's kind of a lot of information that you can capture. Now, if you notice, this is a dynamic view. This is something that is, it only talks to you about the session that is currently connected to a database. What about what happened in past? I want to look up the history of, who connected 10 days ago, who connected 20 days ago. So this view particular does not store information. So, but what you can do is you can use this. Before we get into what you can do, this is an important thing to note, is that there's this _k$ KSU con, this particular view, and there is this sys function that can help you determine the client version as well. Okay, so let's take a look at how this helps us. So as I said, that particular view, v$session connection info, that does not store the information historically. but there is a place where you can find it this information. That is your listener logs, as well as scan listener if you're on rack. So these logs have a lot of information, but this information needs to be decoded. It's not, handed out in a very straightforward forward manner. For example, if you look over here, we see the host. That's pretty simple. You see the port. That's the port of the listener. You see the protocol. Okay. But what you see is the version is in a very cryptic manner, 232 something, something, something. So how do we convert this into a known database version? To do that, this is the view that we were talking about earlier, the sysof function, right? So this particular function, if you apply to that the numbers that are there in your logs, you're going to get the client version. Now, how can you use this more efficiently? Just script it. Write a small script, and you scan through your listener log, and you can see for this particular database that I want to migrate, these are the client versions that I'm connected to, or these are the hosts that are connected to you. These are the protocols that they're using. So now I know that these are the versions, and I need to update this particular client, or I do not. I get all this information that I was looking out for, right? The point over here is to collect all the information so that we can take decisions. What do we need to upgrade? What is the client compatibility? Where do we need to make the changes? And do we need a certificate, SSL certificate update or not? So you want to figure all this out. In order to figure all this out, you need all the information. So these are the ways in which you can get the information. This is a script that was used in the previous slide, and these are the links to detailing about all these things. You'll get it in the presentation. So once you've got all this information, you can you can check the client compatibility, JDBC compatibility, and these are the various matrices that you can then refer to. So let's say you've got a 19C or you've got a 12C client, right? Or you've got a 21C JDBC driver. You can see that it's compatible with 19C client. Okay, fine. It works for me. I don't need to make any changes. I don't need to upgrade my client. So that's the kind of information that you get. So these are the things that you want to do. Now, when you're migrating things, another thing to do is you want to migrate your service as well. So especially if the database identity is changing in that, or SID as we call it, you would want to ensure that all the services that are there on source are always there on target. Okay. Now, while migrating the databases, especially if you're using a logical migration method, you want to ensure that your the way in which logical migration work is that you create an empty target, and then using some method, it could be a data pump, golden gate, XYZ number of methods. Like I've literally listed a ton of methods over here. You copy over the data to your target. That's your logical migration. Now, since you're building out the shell database beforehand, what you need is your immutable properties of your database to be precise. These should be exactly what you desire, or preferably exactly what it is on the source, because you can't change it once the database has been created, right? You'll have to redo the entire thing from scratch. So in order to avoid it, please make sure that the immutable properties are set as required. Again, the initialization parameters are also something that you need to be careful about, right? Especially the compatible. Now, wallets and encryption keys are something that you need to transfer. So if you're migrating your database, now the basic idea is these files should be accessible on the target before you upgrade or migrate it, right? This is the default place where it is. Now, and you'll transfer your wallet to your target. Okay, and once you've transferred your wallet, you want to update your SQLnet.ora. That's nothing but like a pointer to your wallet that contains a pointer to your wallet, you can say. And if you're upgrading your database, then you need to update that pointer to point to the new home, basically. So when you are migrating it, you need to copy over the wallet to the new server and update the wallet, update the pointer. And when you are upgrading it, you just need to update the pointer. That is the difference when you're upgrading and migrating. Now, another thing you should do as a best practice would be to gather statistics about database. That would be your dictionary statistics as well as your fixed object statistics. A tip: transferring statistics via packaging it and transferring it using data pump, export, import, DB link is usually quicker than doing it versus data pump. So this is just a tip in case you're using data pump. Okay. Now, to ensure performance stability, the basic concept to do it is that you want to be using your SQL baselines and profiles. And you want to ensure that these things are transferred over to your target. To do so, you prepare it using these particular procedures, you pack that information, you transport it, and then you unpack it at your target. But you want your profiles and baselines on the target server. That's what we want to accomplish. And then your usual database validations, these would be a part of it. And so in this thing, these are the things that we've been looking at. Okay. And now the final pieces of the puzzle is that once you've migrated, there are a few more things that you need. Now there are changes in behavior of your databases between versions, obviously, right? So you want to know what your privileged users are, what are the packages. So one of the things, especially with Oracle, is that if you're upgrading from 11G, you want to identify who is using an email package, who is using this particular UTL mail package, and you want to, after 11G, these grants have been converted into ACLs. You can think of it in that manner. So you have to identify what were the grants that are there on UTL, HTTP or UTL mail in this particular example. And then you need to use specific procedures to grant appropriate access to those particular ACLs, right? So this is the way you do it once you've identified what the grants were. Now, similarly, another change in behavior is the resource role. That's something very particular to Oracle, very particular to a version, that these things have changed, and you have to identify what is unlimited table space grant, where is it there, where is it present on source, and then identify what all users would need it to the same privileges on target. So this is the view that can help you do it. And after the upgrade, you've got to give the same grant, right? Especially this is very generic information, cron jobs. Do not forget that other than the RDBMS owner, there could be application cron jobs that need update and migration, perhaps need to be moved. So be mindful about those particular accounts as well, and make sure you migrate everything beforehand. You can simplify scheduling via tags. Just put a tag, use SED, and use your various substitution variables in your cron. You can tag it as #mig, so that on the day of the migration, you know exactly what needs to be done. Keep the same schedule to avoid noisy neighbors, conflicts. Whatever schedules you had on source, make sure the same schedules are followed on the target job schedules, right? That is, if your backup job was running, let's say at 4 a.m. on source, let's keep it at 4 a.m. on target as well, because backup is something that can impact your entire backup infrastructure. So that's something. And of course, your jobs would probably need an update of the new home path, any variables. So make sure that you test it and debug it before the migration and not after it. So this is about that. And as like cron jobs, there can also be scheduler jobs, right? And these are transformed, and just ensure that there are a lot of transformations that occur, especially when we're moving to 19C. So make sure that if there are any duplicate jobs, you remove it. And always test your materials views and database links. And another thing is credentials. So after migration, credentials are likely to change, right? The OS credentials. So do update those credentials as well. Now, again, a very generic best practice is that if you're using NFS mounts on your source, make sure that you're the same, it could be an ETL job or something that's running on your source. You want to ensure that those mounts are present on your target as well. So verify those mounts, verify that the privileges are there as required. And one of the last things, be mindful of your backups, install the agent, whatever you do, the way you do your backups, make sure that the backups are configured and tested, because what you want is you want your database to be backup ready the minute you migrate or upgrade it. You don't want to be wasting time after migration, right? You move to a new system, you do not have any backups. So backups are one of the most critical things that you can have for your infrastructure. They're literally like your insurance policy. So you should have a backup. So another best practice before I close, I would like to talk about is Aura Check and AHF. These are something that now are pretty default with an Oracle RDBMS installation. These are nothing but tools, and these tools can give you a lot of health check benefits. They just generate health checks. They give you the scores. They give you warnings about configurations and best practices. This is something that you see in 19C. And with 19C, if you're running on a standalone GI, you'll see that it's 0 bytes, that's empty. So you need to install it. And this is the way you install it. They're just the steps to install it. So once you install it, you'll see these are the list of tools that you get, right? You get Aura Check, which is an incredible tool. You get a lot of other checks. So you can use that, and you can use that to proactively get a really good health check score. And you can even configure it to automatically, generate the report and email that report to you. So this is about that. And once you're done, the final tip would be, please make sure that to shut down your source. I mean, at the end of the migration, you would not want anything connected to your source. Create a brick wall around it if you need to, but make sure that your source is not accessible. And these are something that you could check if you have want to. But yeah, the thing is, once you're done, you should be able to relax. That should be the motto of the migration. So again, thank you so much for your time. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any point. Anything, any point, any discussions would be really appreciated. Thank you so much. Tejas, back to you. Tejas, you're on mute.
So Aishwarya, really great info and great presentation. I would like to say that thanks for such a wonderful presentation. And we haven't got any questions over here. So I think that is good. So if you really want to add anything to your particular presentation right now, definitely you have a few minutes to yourself. Or otherwise, we can just close this session and wait for the next session.
Okay, I think I'm good. I'll share the presentation with you guys and you can distribute it. And yeah, if anybody has any questions at any point, I'll be more than glad to discuss those.
Sure. So everyone, thanks again for attending the session, and definitely stay in touch with us or with Aishwarya directly or through us. Anything is fine with us. And thanks, Aishwarya, for your time. Hope to see you again collaborating with us on SURATi TechTalks and other events in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My pleasure.
Bye for now.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.